The crystal chandeliers of Le Petit Chateau cast a warm glow over the pristine white tablecloths and gleaming silverware. The air was thick with the aroma of truffle-infused dishes and the gentle murmur of New York's elite as they dined in one of the city's most exclusive restaurants. Amidst this opulent scene, Claire Thompson moved with practiced grace, her steps quick and sure as she navigated between tables. At just 19, Claire's delicate features and doe-like brown eyes belied a strength forged through years of struggle. Her honey-blonde hair was pulled back into a neat bun, not a strand out of place despite the hectic pace of the busy Friday night service. She wore the standard uniform of Le Petit Chateau's waitstaff, a crisp white shirt, black bow tie, and tailored black pants, with an air of quiet dignity. As she approached table 12 with a tray of appetizers balanced expertly on one hand, Claire's keen ears picked up the conversation before she could see the occupants. "Oh my God, can you believe what she's wearing?" A shrill voice cut through the ambient chatter. "I swear if I had to dress like that, I'd die of embarrassment." Raucous laughter followed, and Claire's steps faltered for just a moment before she steeled herself and rounded the corner. The sight that greeted her was one she'd seen countless times before, a group of young women, probably no older than she was, dripping in designer labels and radiating an aura of entitlement. At the center of the group sat Tiffany Vanderbilt, her platinum blonde hair artfully tousled and her manicured hands adorned with enough diamonds to feed a small country. Flanking her were her usual cohorts, Ashley, Brittany, and Madison, names that seemed almost interchangeable in Claire's mind, as were their attitudes. "Good evening, ladies," Claire said, her voice steady and professional as she began to set down the appetizers. "We have the truffle-infused foie gras, the beluga caviar blinis, and the saffron-scented lobster bites. Can I get you anything else?" Tiffany's ice-blue eyes raked over Claire with unconcealed disdain. Well, if it isn't our little Cinderella," she drawled, her lips curving into a cruel smirk. "Tell me, sweetheart, do you ever look at us and just dream?" Claire felt her cheeks heat up, but she kept her expression neutral. "Is there anything else you need for your meal, miss?" "Oh, come on," Brittany chimed in, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "You can tell us. I bet you go home every night and pretend you're one of us, don't you? Trying on cheap knockoffs and pretending you belong." The other girls tittered, clearly enjoying the sport of tormenting their server. Claire's hands clenched into fists at her sides, her nails digging into her palms as she fought to maintain her composure. "Your meals will be out shortly," she managed to say, her voice barely above a whisper. "Please enjoy your appetizers." As Claire turned to leave, she could feel the weight of dozens of eyes on her. Other diners had noticed the commotion, some watching with mild interest, others with discomfort, but none intervening. In that moment, Claire felt utterly alone, a feeling she thought she'd left behind in the cold halls of St. Mary's Orphanage. Back in the kitchen, Claire leaned against the cool stainless steel of a prep table, taking deep breaths to calm her racing heart. She couldn't afford to lose this job, not when her entire future hung in the balance. "You okay, kid?" The gruff voice of Marco, the head chef, broke through her thoughts. His weathered face was creased with concern as he looked at her. Claire managed a weak smile. "I'm fine, Marco. Just, you know how it is." Marco's eyes darkened. "Table 12 again? Those little princesses need to learn some manners. Want me to spit in their food? Marco." Claire couldn't help but laugh, some of the tension leaving her body. "You know we can't do that. Besides, I've dealt with worse." And she had. Growing up in the system, bounced from one foster home to another, Claire had developed a thick skin and an unwavering determination. It was that determination that had earned her a full scholarship to Columbia University, where she was now in her second year of pre-law studies. Every shift at Le Petit Chateau, every snide comment and condescending look, was just another step towards her goal of becoming a lawyer and advocating for kids like herself. "Order up for table 12. The call came from the line, and Claire squared her shoulders. She had a job to do, and she'd be damned if she let a bunch of trust fund brats break her spirit. As she made her way back to the dining room, balancing a tray laden with exquisitely plated main courses, Claire allowed herself a moment of pride. She might not have been born with a silver spoon in her mouth, but she was carving out her own path, one grueling shift at a time. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of orders, plates, and forced smiles. Claire moved through the restaurant like a ghost, efficient and unobtrusive, trying her best to fade into the background. But as the night wore on, she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. It wasn't until nearly midnight, as the last of the diners were finishing their desserts and digestives, that disaster struck. Claire was clearing table 12, the girls having left in a cloud of expensive perfume and casual cruelty, when she heard a commotion from the next table over. "Excuse me, miss?" A deep, authoritative voice called out. "Could we get some more wine, please?" Claire turned, her arms full of dirty dishes, to see a distinguished-looking man in his 50s gesturing towards an empty bottle of Chateau Margaux. She nodded quickly. "Of course, sir. I'll be right back with that." As she hurried towards the service station, her mind racing with the tasks she still needed to complete before closing, Claire didn't notice the wayward strap of a designer handbag left carelessly in the aisle. Her foot caught, and for a heart-stopping moment, the world tilted on its axis. The crash of shattering porcelain seemed to echo through the entire restaurant. Claire found herself sprawled on the floor, surrounded by broken dishes and the remnants of half-eaten meals. Worse still, she realized with dawning horror, a splash of red wine had arced through the air, landing squarely on the crisp white shirt of the man who had requested the refill. A hush fell over the dining room, broken only by a familiar, malicious laugh. "Oh my God," Tiffany's voice rang out, dripping with glee. "I can't believe how clumsy she is. Daddy always says you can't expect much from the help, but this is ridiculous." Claire's face burned with humiliation as she scrambled to her feet, apologies tumbling from her lips. "I'm so sorry, sir. Please, let me get you a cloth. I'll pay for the dry cleaning, I swear." The man, to his credit, seemed more concerned than angry. "It's all right, accidents happen," he began, but his voice was drowned out by the renewed laughter from Tiffany and her friends, who had paused their exit to watch the unfolding drama. "You'll pay for it," Brittany scoffed. "With what money? I bet your entire paycheck couldn't cover one of his socks." "Ladies, that's quite enough," the man said firmly, but Tiffany was on a roll. "No, I think it's time someone taught this little charity case a lesson," she sneered, advancing on Claire. "You don't belong here, you know. Playing dress-up in that uniform doesn't change who you really are. Just some orphan nobody who'll never amount to anything." Claire felt as if all the air had been sucked out of the room. How did Tiffany know about her background? Had she overheard something? Or was Claire's otherness so obvious that anyone could see it? "I think," Tiffany continued, her voice syrupy sweet, "it's time you found a job more suited to your talents. I hear the trash company is hiring. At least there, when you knock things over, it'll be an improvement." Tears pricked at Claire's eyes, but she blinked them back furiously. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing her cry. But as she opened her mouth to respond, though what she could possibly say, she had no idea, another voice cut through the tension like a knife. "That is quite enough." The command rang out with such authority that even Tiffany took a step back. All eyes turned to the source, the man whose shirt Claire had stained, now on his feet and radiating an aura of power that seemed to fill the entire room. "Young lady," he said, fixing Tiffany with a steely gaze, "I've sat here all evening and watched you and your friends torment this hard-working young woman, and I've had quite enough. Your behavior is not only reprehensible but also painfully short-sighted." Tiffany's face, usually so composed, crumpled in confusion. I don't understand. Who do you think you are?" The man's lips curved into a humorless smile. "William Hart," he said simply, and Claire felt her heart skip a beat. William Hart, the William Hart, CEO of Hart International Hotels and Resorts, one of the largest luxury hospitality chains in the world. And, more importantly to Claire, the man whose foundation had provided her scholarship to Columbia. Tiffany went pale, her eyes widening in horror as she realized the magnitude of her mistake. "Mr. Hart, we didn't know. Please, let me explain. Save it," William cut her off with a sharp gesture. I'm not interested in your excuses. What I am interested in is making something very clear to you and everyone else in this restaurant. He turned to Claire, his expression softening. Miss Thompson, isn't it? Claire nodded mutely, too shocked to speak. Claire here, William continued, addressing the now rapt audience, is not just an exemplary employee of this establishment. She is also one of the top students in her class at Columbia Law School, where she attends on a full scholarship provided by my foundation. We select only the brightest and most promising young minds for this honor, and Claire has consistently exceeded our already high expectations. A murmur ran through the crowd, and Claire could feel the shift in the air. The looks of pity and disdain were morphing into something else. Respect, admiration, even a touch of awe. Furthermore, William went on, his voice growing harder as he turned back to Tiffany and her friends, I had been considering Claire for a prestigious internship with our legal department upon her graduation. An opportunity, I might add, that your parents have been lobbying quite aggressively for you to receive, Miss Vanderbilt. Tiffany looked as if she might faint, her carefully cultivated composure crumbling before everyone's eyes. Mr. Hart, please, she stammered. I had no idea. If I'd known dash. If you'd known. William's voice was like ice. That's precisely the problem, isn't it? You didn't know, so you felt entitled to treat another human being like dirt beneath your shoes. Tell me, in what world does that behavior become acceptable simply because you don't know someone's credentials? He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. I built my company on the principle that every person, from the CEO to the newest housekeeper, deserves respect and dignity. It's clear to me that you ladies have a lot to learn about that concept. Turning back to Claire, his tone softened once more. Miss Thompson, I apologize for the way you've been treated this evening. Please, take the rest of the night off. With pay, of course. And I'd like you to come see me in my office on Monday. We have an internship to discuss. Claire felt as if she were dreaming. This couldn't be real. Things like this didn't happen to girls like her. But as she looked around at the astonished faces of the other diners, at Tiffany and her friends shrinking back in shame, at the proud smile on Marco's face as he peeked out from the kitchen, she knew it was true. Thank you, Mr. Hart, she managed to say, her voice thick with emotion. I don't know what to say. William smiled, a genuine warmth in his eyes. You don't need to say anything, Claire. Your hard work and perseverance speak for themselves. Now, go home and rest. You've more than earned it. As Claire gathered her things and prepared to leave, she could hear William addressing the restaurant at large. Let this be a lesson to all of us, he was saying. You never know the battles someone is fighting, the obstacles they've overcome, or the potential they hold. Kindness and respect should be our default, not luxuries we extend only to those we deem worthy. Stepping out into the cool New York night, Claire took a deep breath, feeling as if a great weight had been lifted from her shoulders. For the first time in as long as she could remember, she felt truly seen. Not as an orphan, not as a scholarship kid, not as a waitress, but as Claire Thompson, a young woman with a bright future ahead of her. As she walked down the bustling street, the glittering lights of the city seemed to shine a little brighter. Claire knew that this was just the beginning. There would be more challenges ahead, more battles to fight. But for now, she allowed herself to bask in the glow of victory, of justice served, of a future brimming with possibility. Little did she know, her story was far from over. The events of that night would set in motion a chain of events that would not only change her life but ripple out to touch countless others. For in that moment of humiliation turned triumph, Claire Thompson had found not just an ally, but a mentor who would help her reshape the very landscape of opportunity for those who, like her, had started life with the odds stacked against them. As she disappeared into the subway, heading back to her tiny apartment in Queens, the whispers began. In penthouses and boardrooms across the city, the story of the waitress and the hotel magnate began to spread. And in those whispers lay the seeds of change. A change that would challenge the very foundations of privilege and power in the city that never sleeps. For Claire Thompson, the Rayol journey was just beginning. The story of Claire Thompson's encounter with William Hart spread through New York's high society like wildfire. By Monday morning, It seemed everyone had an opinion on the matter. Some praised Hart for his intervention, hailing it as a refreshing display of social responsibility from a titan of industry. Others, particularly those who ran in the same circles as the Vanderbilts, muttered darkly about Hart overstepping his bounds and humiliating those poor girls in public. But for Claire, the whirlwind of gossip and speculation felt distant, almost unreal, as she stood outside the imposing glass and steel skyscraper that housed Hart International's headquarters. She smoothed down her one good blazer, a thrift store find that she'd painstakingly tailored herself, and took a deep breath before pushing through the revolving doors. The lobby was a marvel of modern architecture, all sleek lines and polished surfaces. Claire felt acutely out of place as she approached the reception desk, her heart pounding so loudly she was sure the impeccably dressed woman behind the counter could hear it. "Good morning," Claire said, proud of how steady she kept her voice. "My name is Claire Thompson. I have an appointment with Mr. Hart." The receptionist's eyebrows rose slightly, but her professional demeanor never wavered. "Of course, Miss Thompson. Mr. Hart is expecting you. Please take the executive elevator to the 50th floor. Mr. Hart's assistant will meet you there." As Claire stepped into the elevator, her mind raced. What exactly was she walking into? Was this really about an internship, or had Mr. Hart simply been trying to make a point that night at the restaurant? And if it was real, how could she possibly measure up to the other candidates? Kids who'd probably been groomed for positions like this since birth. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime, revealing a reception area that was equal parts imposing and welcoming. Warm wood tones softened the modern lines, and tasteful art adorned the walls. Behind a curved desk sat a woman in her. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime, revealing a reception area that was equal parts imposing and welcoming. Warm wood tones softened the modern lines, and tasteful art adorned the walls. Behind a curved desk sat a woman in her mid-40s, her salt and pepper hair pulled back in a sleek bun. "Miss Thompson," she said, rising to greet Claire with a warm smile. "I'm Margaret, Mr. Hart's executive assistant. He's just wrapping up a call. Please, have a seat. Can I get you anything? Water? Coffee?" Claire shook her head, not trusting herself to speak. She perched on the edge of a plush leather armchair, her hands clasped tightly in her lap to keep them from shaking. A few minutes later, the heavy oak door to William Hart's office swung open. "Claire," he said, his face breaking into a genuine smile. "Thank you for coming. Please, step into my office." As Claire followed him into the spacious corner office, she couldn't help but gasp. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking view of the New York skyline, the city spread out before them like a glittering tapestry. "Quite a view, isn't it?" William said, gesturing for Claire to take a seat in one of the chairs facing his desk. "I never tire of it. It reminds me of the sheer possibility this city holds, for those willing to work for it." He settled into his own chair, fixing Claire with a penetrating gaze. "Now, I imagine you have quite a few questions about why you're here." Claire nodded, finding her voice at last. "Mr. Hart, I can't thank you enough for what you did at the restaurant. But I have to ask, was that offer of an internship real? Or was it just to make a point to those girls?" William's eyes crinkled with amusement. "Direct and to the point. I like that." He leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. "The offer was very real, Claire. In fact, I've been following your progress since you first received the Hart Foundation scholarship. Your academic achievements are impressive, but it's your resilience and work ethic that truly stand out." He paused, his expression growing more serious. "But I want to be clear. This isn't charity. The internship I'm offering is highly competitive and demanding. You'll be working directly with our legal team on real cases, often putting in long hours. It won't be easy, but if you're up for the challenge, it could be the launching pad for an exceptional career." Claire felt a mix of excitement and trepidation swirling in her stomach. This was everything she'd ever dreamed of, a chance to prove herself, to make a real difference. But could she really hold her own in a world so far removed from everything she knew? As if reading her thoughts, William continued, I know you might be feeling out of your depth. But Claire, that fire I saw in your eyes at the restaurant, that determination to keep going no matter what life throws at you, that's not something that can be taught. It's a rare quality, and it's exactly what we need here at Heart International. He leaned forward, his gaze intense. So what do you say, Claire? Are you ready to step into a whole new world? For a moment, Claire was transported back to that night in the restaurant. The humiliation, the fear, the feeling of being so small and insignificant. But then she remembered the way it felt when William had stood up for her, when he'd seen her for who she truly was. She straightened her shoulders, meeting William's gaze with a newfound confidence. Mr. Hart, she said, her voice steady and clear, I've been ready my whole life. A slow smile spread across William's face. That's what I was hoping you'd say. He pressed a button on his desk intercom. Margaret, could you bring in the internship contract, please? As Margaret entered with a folder, William turned back to Claire. Now, let's talk details. The internship will last for 6 months, with the possibility of extension or even a full-time position upon completion, depending on your performance. As Claire listened to William outline the terms of the internship, she felt a surge of excitement and determination. This was it, her chance to rewrite her story, to prove to the world and to herself that where you come from doesn't dictate where you can go. Little did she know, this was just the beginning of a journey that would challenge her in ways she never imagined, testing not just her legal skills but her very sense of identity and purpose. The next few months were a whirlwind for Claire. By day, she threw herself into her new role at Heart International, absorbing everything she could about corporate law, contract negotiations, and the intricacies of the hospitality industry. By night, she pored over her law school textbooks, determined not to let her academic performance slip even an inch. It wasn't easy. The work was demanding, the hours long, and the learning curve steep. There were nights when Claire would stumble back to her tiny apartment, her eyes burning from staring at contracts all day, wondering if she was in over her head. But every morning she'd wake up before dawn, put on one of the new suits William had insisted on buying her. You're representing Heart International now, Claire. You need to look the part. And head back into the fray with renewed determination. Her colleagues at Heart International were a mixed bag. Some, like Margaret, took Claire under their wing, offering guidance and support. Others viewed her with suspicion or even outright hostility, seeing her as an interloper who had lucked into her position. One such person was Bradley Worthington III, a junior partner in the legal department who had been gunning for the position Claire now held. With his Ivy League pedigree and family connections, Bradley had assumed the internship was his for the taking. Claire's arrival had thrown a wrench in his carefully laid plans, and he wasn't shy about letting her know it. Well, well, he drawled one afternoon, cornering Claire by the coffee machine. If it isn't our resident Cinderella. Tell me, Thompson, how does it feel to have the fairy godfather of the business world wave his magic wand and make all your dreams come true? Claire felt her cheeks burn, but she kept her voice level as she replied, I'm not sure, Worthington. How does it feel to have all the advantages in the world and still come up short? Bradley's face darkened with anger, but before he could retort, a new voice cut in. Is there a problem here? They both turned to see William Hart standing in the doorway, his expression unreadable. Not at all, Mr. Hart, Bradley said quickly, his tone suddenly obsequious. Just welcoming our new intern to the team. William's eyes flickered between them, a hint of amusement playing at the corners of his mouth. I see. Well, don't let me interrupt. Carry on. As he walked away, Claire couldn't help but feel a small thrill of victory. She might still be finding her footing in this new world, but she was learning fast, and she wasn't about to let anyone push her around. Weeks turned into months, and Claire found herself thriving in her new role. Her keen intellect and tireless work ethic began to win over even her harshest critics. She developed a reputation for being able to spot potential issues in contracts that others missed, and her innovative approach to problem-solving caught the attention of the senior partners. But as Claire's star rose at Heart International, she found herself increasingly torn between two worlds. Her old friends from the restaurant and her classmates at Columbia began to look at her differently. Some were genuinely happy for her success, but others whispered behind her back, accusing her of selling out or forgetting where she came from. One crisp autumn evening, as Claire was burning the midnight oil in her office, poring over a particularly complex merger agreement, she heard a soft knock at her door. Looking up, she was surprised to see William standing there, a concerned expression on his face. "Claire," he said gently, "it's past midnight. Don't you think it's time to call it a day?" Claire rubbed her eyes, suddenly aware of how exhausted she was. "I'm sorry, Mr. Hart. I just wanted to make sure this was perfect before the meeting tomorrow." William walked into the office, settling into the chair across from her desk. "Claire, your work has been exemplary. But I'm worried about you. You're pushing yourself too hard." Claire felt a lump form in her throat. "I have to," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I can't let you down. Not after everything you've done for me." William's expression softened. "Oh, Claire, you could never let me down. Don't you see? The reason I took a chance on you wasn't just because of your potential as a lawyer. It was because I saw in you the same fire, the same drive that I had when I was starting out." He leaned forward, his eyes intent on hers. "But Claire, that fire can consume you if you're not careful. Trust me, I know. I've seen too many bright young talents burn out because they forgot to live, to connect with the world outside these office walls." Claire felt tears pricking at the corners of her eyes. "It's just, I don't know where I fit anymore. My old friends, they look at me like I'm a stranger. And here, no matter how hard I work, there are still people who think I don't belong." William nodded, understanding in his eyes. Identity is a tricky thing, isn't it? Especially when you're straddling two worlds. But Claire, that's your strength, not your weakness. You have a perspective that none of these silver spoon kids could ever have. Don't lose that. He stood up, walking to the window and gazing out at the glittering city below. "You know, when I first started out, I was a lot like you. Hungry, driven, determined to prove myself. And I did. I built this company from the ground up, became the success story everyone talks about." He turned back to Claire, a hint of sadness in his smile. "But along the way, I lost something. I forgot why I started this journey in the first place. It took me years to realize that success means nothing if you're not using it to make a difference." Claire felt a spark of curiosity. "Is that why you started the foundation?" William nodded. "Partly. But it's more than that. Claire, I've been watching you these past few months. You have a gift, not just for law, but for understanding people, for seeing the humanity in every situation. That's rare in our line of work, and it's precious." He walked back to her desk, his expression serious. "I have a proposition for you. One that I think might help you find that balance you're looking for, and in the process, help a lot of other people too." Claire leaned forward, intrigued. "What kind of proposition?" William smiled, a glint of excitement in his eyes. "How would you like to help me reshape the Heart Foundation? To create a program that identifies and supports young people like yourself, not just with scholarships, but with mentorship, internships, and real opportunities to break into industries that have been closed to them for too long." Claire felt her heart race with excitement. This was it. The chance to combine her newfound skills and connections with her passion for helping others who had started life with the odds stacked against them. "Mr. Hart," she said, a smile spreading across her face, "I think that sounds like the opportunity of a lifetime." William chuckled. "I was hoping you'd say that. But Claire, this won't be easy. We'll be challenging the status quo, ruffling a lot of feathers. Are you ready for that fight?" Claire stood up, feeling a new sense of purpose coursing through her. "Mr. Hart, I've been fighting my whole life. But this time, I won't be fighting just for myself. I'll be fighting for every kid out there who's been told they don't belong, that they're not good enough." She extended her hand, her eyes shining with determination. "Count me in." As William shook her hand, sealing their new partnership, neither of them could have predicted the challenges that lay ahead. For in taking on this new mission, Claire was about to step into a world of corporate politics, social upheaval, and personal reckoning that would test her in ways she never imagined. But in that moment, standing in that office high above the city, Claire Thompson, once a lonely orphan, now a rising star in the corporate world, felt for the first time that she had found her true calling. The road ahead might be difficult, but with William Hart as her mentor and her own indomitable spirit as her guide, she was ready to take on whatever came her way. Little did she know, the biggest challenges, and the greatest triumphs, were yet to see. The news of Claire's new role in reshaping the Hart Foundation spread through Hart International like wildfire. For some, it was a cause for celebration, a sign that the company was truly committed to diversity and social responsibility. For others, it was a threat to the established order, a dangerous precedent that could upend the delicate balance of power in the corporate world. Claire threw herself into her new responsibilities with characteristic determination. She spent countless hours researching successful mentorship programs, studying the barriers that kept underprivileged youth out of top-tier industries, and brainstorming innovative ways to bridge the gap between talent and opportunity. But as she delved deeper into her work, Claire began to uncover uncomfortable truths about the very system she was now a part of. She discovered that many of Hart International's partner companies had abysmal track records when it came to hiring and promoting minorities and individuals from disadvantaged backgrounds. Even within Hart International itself, she found that the higher up the corporate ladder she looked, the less diverse the faces became. One crisp autumn morning, Claire strode into William's office, a thick file tucked under her arm and a look of grim determination on her face. "Mr. Hart," she said, her voice steady despite the nervous flutter in her stomach, "we need to talk about our diversity initiatives." William looked up from his computer, his brow furrowing at Claire's serious tone. "Of course, Claire. What's on your mind?" Claire took a deep breath and launched into her presentation. She laid out the statistics she'd gathered, the patterns of systemic exclusion she'd uncovered, and the potential legal and ethical implications for Hart International if these issues weren't addressed. As she spoke, she could see William's expression growing more troubled. When she finished, there was a long moment of silence. Finally, William leaned back in his chair, a mix of pride and concern in his eyes. "Claire, I have to say, I'm impressed by the thoroughness of your research. But I hope you realize the magnitude of what you're proposing. Pushing for this level of change, it's going to ruffle a lot of feathers. Are you prepared for the backlash?" Claire squared her shoulders. "Mr. Hart, with all due respect, isn't that exactly why you brought me on? To challenge the status quo? To bring a fresh perspective?" A slow smile spread across William's face. "Indeed it is, Claire. Indeed it is." He stood up, walking to the window and gazing out at the city below. "You know, when I started this company, I had dreams of changing the world. Somewhere along the way, I let myself get comfortable, let the system dictate the rules." He turned back to Claire, a newfound fire in his eyes. "But you're right. It's time for a change. And we're going to lead it." Over the next few months, Claire worked tirelessly to implement her vision for the new Hart Foundation initiative. She developed a comprehensive program that included mentorship opportunities, paid internships, and a revolutionary blind hiring process that focused on skills and potential rather than pedigree or connections. But as the program gained traction and began to attract attention both within the company and in the wider business world, Claire found herself facing increasing resistance. Bradley Worthington III, still smarting from being passed over for the internship, became one of her most vocal opponents. He began spreading rumors that Claire was pushing a radical agenda that would undermine the company's reputation and drive away valuable partners. Even some of Claire's allies began to waver as the pressure mounted. Margaret, who had been one of her staunchest supporters, pulled her aside one day after a particularly heated board meeting. "Claire dear," she said, her voice low and worried, "I admire what you're trying to do, I really do. But don't you think you might be pushing too hard, too fast? Some of the board members are talking about how you're biting the hand that feeds you." Claire felt a flash of anger, quickly followed by a wave of doubt. Was she pushing too hard? Was she jeopardizing everything she'd worked for? That night, as she sat in her small apartment, Surrounded by stacks of reports and proposal drafts, Claire felt the weight of her choices pressing down on her. She thought about how far she'd come, from a lonely orphan to a rising star in one of the most prestigious companies in the world. Was she really willing to risk it all? As if on cue, her phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Lena, one of the first participants in the Heart Foundation's new mentorship program. The message read, "Just wanted to say thank you again for everything. I never thought someone like me could have a shot at a future like this. You're changing lives, Claire." Claire felt tears prick at her eyes as she read the message. This was why she was fighting so hard. This was what really mattered. With renewed determination, she threw herself back into her work. But little did she know, the real battle was just beginning. The next morning, Claire arrived at the office to find an unusual flurry of activity. As she made her way to her desk, she could feel eyes on her, could hear the whispers that fell silent as she passed. "Claire," Margaret's voice called out, a note of urgency in her tone. "Mr. Hart needs to see you in the conference room. Now." Heart pounding, Claire made her way to the conference room. As she entered, she found William Hart pacing back and forth, his face grave. On the large screen at the end of the room was a paused news broadcast. "Claire," William said, his voice tight with tension, "we have a situation." He picked up a remote and unpaused the broadcast. Claire watched in growing horror as a familiar face filled the screen. It was Tiffany Vanderbilt, the girl from the restaurant all those months ago. "And I'm telling you, Tom," Tiffany was saying, her voice dripping with fake sincerity, "this whole diversity program is just a PR stunt. Heart International doesn't care about helping underprivileged kids. They're just trying to cover up their own discriminatory practices." The camera cut to a serious-looking news anchor. Strong accusations from Tiffany Vanderbilt, whose family has long-standing ties with Heart International. Ms. Vanderbilt claims to have insider information about the company's hiring practices and alleges that the recent diversity initiative, spearheaded by former Waitress turned rising executive Claire Thompson, is nothing more than a smokescreen. William muted the broadcast, turning to Claire with a grim expression. "It gets worse. Tiffany's father is threatening to pull out of a major deal unless we, and I quote, rein in this diversity nonsense." Claire felt as if the floor was tilting beneath her feet. Everything she'd worked for, everything she'd believed in, was suddenly under attack. And worse, her past, the very thing that had driven her to fight for change, was being used as a weapon against her. But as she looked at William, seeing the conflict in his eyes, Claire knew that this was the moment of truth. This was where she would truly discover what she was made of, and what Heart International really stood for. Taking a deep breath, Claire straightened her shoulders and met William's gaze. "Mr. Hart," she said, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions raging inside her, "what are we going to do?" William's expression shifted, a glimmer of his old fire returning to his eyes. "We're going to fight, Claire. But I need to know, are you ready for this? Because once we take this stand, there's no going back." Claire thought about Lena, about all the other young people counting on her. She thought about that night in the restaurant, about all the nights before it when she'd felt small and powerless. And she thought about the promise she'd made to herself, to be a voice for those who had none. With a determined nod, Claire replied, "I'm ready, Mr. Hart. Let's show them what we're really made of." As William smiled and began outlining their strategy, Claire knew that the real battle was just beginning. But for the first time in her life, she felt truly, unshakably certain of her path.